And the good times continue on Smoking with the Blend, and I am with some cigar royalty here. 5 generations. The Cuevas boys are here. Luis and Alec. It is an absolute honor to have you guys on the show. Luis and his son, Alec. Guys, thanks for hanging out with us.
Oh my goodness, thanks for having us, considering us. I really, really appreciate it.
Truthfully.
Yeah. So we're at City Cigar Lounge in downtown Miami, one of my favorite spots. Shout out to Tico Gutierrez and all the people here at City Cigar Lounge for opening up the doors and letting us hang out. All right, so let's talk about this. This is an amazing story. This is, if there is more of an American dream quintessential story, 5 generations from Spain to Cuba to the DR to Miami, and it's landed on you to keep the ball going here, my friend.
Well, you know what? It is really the American dream, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, you know, now with Alec as part of it, it kind of brings everything full circle, right? So I'm first generation Cuban American, and obviously my dad is as well, and my uncle when they started the factory, and to have them land in the industry that my great-grandfather had begun back in Cuba as a Spanish immigrant is phenomenal. It's super cool. And then to have Alec actually like it and want to be a part of it is even more phenomenal. So I'm very blessed to work with my father and my son in an industry that I love and that so many people love.
All right, so before we get to the history of the Cuevas Cigar Company, Director of Operations, Alec, okay, 22 years old, 22. How did a guy who wanted to be a zookeeper get into the cigar business? You wanted to be Ron McGill? You wanted to be the next? How do you go from zookeeper to cigars?
First off, I'm surprised that I'm the only you know that.
We've got people. We've got crack research here at My Blend.
People have questions. Definitely. So initially, it was more so growing up every summer going to the factory and visiting my grandfather. A lot of that aspect, and mind you, I am relatively young, but when I was much younger, was going up, seeing my grandfather at the factory. You know, he'd be working at our old factory, mind you, and give me a nice little hug. It'd be 5, maybe 6 in the morning or so, and he'd send me right downstairs to essentially start packing up cigars with the next ladies that we had working there. So I was kind of always surrounded by this aroma of cigars. And with that knowledge, I didn't really know where to go with it. As you just said, I wanted to be a zookeeper growing up. I had a huge infatuation with animals. That vision that I had quickly just kind of went on by the wayside by the age of like 10 and 12 or so. And that's when I started getting more into cigars and what they were about. So I had asked my dad a lot of questions about it and so forth. Fast forward, I ended up nabbing this gig at Neptune Cigars. And I worked with them on the retail aspect of things for close to about a year. That's when a lot of the knowledge in regards towards smoking cigars, blends, strengths, that sort of thing really got me into the gist as to what cigars truthfully are. And then my father offered me the position of Director of Operations, and I've been with my dad full time ever since.
Now, as a dad, it's got to be, number one, being Latino. You have a son. That's amazing. You're right there. You're winning. You're house money right there. You're a house money. But then to actually say, Dad, I want to do what you do. So tell me what that was for you.
As I said earlier, it's a blessing. I mean, our daughter, for example, he and his sister are 1 year and 18 days apart, almost Irish twins, and she has zero interest in the cigar industry.
Is she a zookeeper?
She's just finishing. She's about to go to law school, but she is so adamant about the smell and the smoke. She hates it.
Oh no!
So we're very much a family operation. My wife's a teacher, so in the summers she's off, and we will go to the trade convention shows. And it's a family endeavor, right? It's all built around family. Everything from our banding or the names for cigars, all of it, right? It's all family. And I remember thinking in 2019, bring her over. She could at least make Cuban coffee and coladita when people walk by, that kind of thing. And then my wife has this epiphany and says, "Can you imagine this beautiful young lady going like this at a booth?" I mean, who's going to go near that booth, right?
Yes.
Not going to work. So, yeah, the fact that he got into it and really, really liked it, and then smoked so many different brands when he was working at the other shop, it's been a blessing. And then you couple that with the fact that my dad's running the factory, and it's really, really a neat thing. And I don't take it for granted. I think we're very blessed and very fortunate.
All right, so let's talk about, let's peel it back. We mentioned it, 5 generations of Cuevas in the cigar business here. So you guys in terms of your own brand, which we're smoking right now, it's baby. It's what, 4 years old?
Yeah, just learning how to walk.
But the company's 100 years old. So tell us about the story of Cuevas.
Well, my great grandfather, when he immigrated from Spain in the 19th century, he had been essentially a farmer in Santander, in the northern part of Spain. He comes down to Cuba, Pinar del Rio, which is the westernmost part of the island. And there he becomes a tobacco farmer by default, because tobacco was grown in that part of Cuba. My grandfather was able to do very well with it. And then 1959 happened and everything's gone. By 1968, my father had gone to Spain and he was able to us over in 1970. So I was born over there in 66. So I was 4, we wound up in Spain. We were in Spain for almost a year at that point. And then we want to come into the States.
Right.
In the States, my dad reinvents himself, opens up a different business, and does well. Again, the American dream lived, right?
Absolutely.
And experienced. And one of his brothers, 10 brothers and sisters, one of them decides Sergio. So my uncle Sergio, who just passed away last week, unfortunately, he had long drawn out illness, and he and my dad had gone separate ways sometime back in 2007 to be exact. And in any event, going back to the way they did it, in the 80s, my uncle and my dad decided to open up a factory in the Dominican Republic. Now, my dad had his business here, but my uncle then ran the factory full-time over there. I would spend my summers, and my dad was essentially financing things and go over there as often as he could. When the 90s hit, my father and his business partner dissolved the company. Business partner retired, and my dad retired, winds up going to the Dominican Republic, and that's when the factory was really in full-on production. At that point, Carlos Tarano, who was a dear friend of the family, the very first Taranos were made there. And if you guys have been smoking for a while, you remember these Carlos Tarano boxes. You'd be Carlos the First, Roman numerals, Carlos the Second, Carlos the Third, Carlos IV the Fourth, etc. Right? And with him, a lot of brands were then brought into the factory. So through that factory of Cuevas y Hermanos, which was the name of the original factory, Dunhill went there, Peterson of Dublin, Villiger, first Gurkhas, Yumuri, Vuelta Abajo, obviously Toraño, La Perla Habana. I mean, a lot of brands went through that, and it was a really cool time, especially when the boom hit. And so it was a good ride. And in the 80s, when I was, in 83, I was 16, I would spend my summers with my uncle at the factory and kind of becoming immersed in tobacco. And I did different things before I got into this with my father, but again, I was kind of surrounded by it for a very long time. And it was just a phenomenal time. And then once my dad and my uncle went their separate ways, my father was thinking about coming back to the States and just hanging it up. I remember I took a flight in 2009. It was an evening, and I came back the next day, and I said, I think we should keep this going. I'm an only child. It's a shame. Great-grandpop did this. Grandpop did this. You're doing this. Let's give it a go. So we did. And the factory still continues to manufacture for other brands, but I was always afraid of launching our own brand because I knew how difficult it was. The number of people that go through a factory with their dream of having a brand and falter within the first year is astronomical.
And you guys saw it firsthand.
Yes. Yes, because you can have the world's greatest cigar. So I've got to convince Tico, who doesn't know me from Adam, well, he does, obviously, but let's assume he doesn't,
Sure.
to put in his space, and it's only limited, a brand that he's never heard of. And that's a real difficult challenge. And so I wasn't sure how to do it. But the FDA, I'm going to get a little geeky here, the FDA had mandated, and they haven't followed up on it, thank God, had mandated that if you didn't have a brand out by a certain month in 2016, you could not then launch a brand, period.
So it
was do or die.
They gave history a nudge.
That's it. It was do or die. And so we did. In 2016, we brought in the first Casa Cuevas, but the official launch was April of 2017. So we fulfilled what was demanded of the FDA with some local shops that knew us and whatnot. So I did that part of it, but we were really ready to launch full on in April of 2017. And we did. And here we are, 4 years later, 4 and a few months, right?
Yeah.
What are we, in August? So 4 years, 3 months?
Yeah.
You know, as we've grown, a lot of times we can't be at one place at once, at the same place at once, because I'll have an event, let's say in Colorado, and he'll have an event in Arizona. It's the same date. So he will have to go on his own to Arizona and represent the brand and do the best he can to get that into the consumer's hands, to educate them, to let them know how passionate we are about the cigars. and he does a phenomenal job at it. So he's flown on his own, had events on his own. He's very, very, very good at what he does.
All right. So the original, you had 3 brands when you guys started.
Three blends, correct.
3 blends. And now you've got something new.
Yes, well, we started with the 3 blends, and then in 2019, July, we launched the Reserva brand of ours, or line, I should say. Those are, and getting geek on everybody else's, are grandfathered products. And then we also launched La Mandaria, the sledgehammer, which is based on that break-in that we had, and I'm sure everybody's heard about this at this point. And then we didn't do anything again till now, 2021, when we launched Patrimonio. So we're really slow and methodical in launching product because I'm a firm believer, and by proxy so is he, that it's good to have things take root, take hold,
right.
Let the consumer become accustomed to that brand, see if they like it, and then you launch something else, and you're not overwhelming them with a whole slew of different facings.
That's smart.
We take our time. So we waited a long time to launch Patrimonio, and again, the other stuff was Cuevas. Cuevas is also Cuevas, but the name Patrimonio, which essentially is an homage to the paternal line of my family and their involvement in tobacco, it made perfect sense. And that's what you're smoking now. And it's something totally out of our wheelhouse. It's completely different. It's a Corojo wrapper. None of our blends have Corojo. It's got some Peruvian tobacco in it. None of our blends have Peruvian. So we've tried to always keep it fresh and new for the consumer, and try to be really careful so that the perception that all we're doing is unbanding, rebanding, repackaging the same cigar. That's not what we do, and we want to make sure that the consumer never thinks that's what we're doing. So when you pick up this cigar and you pick up any of our other cigars, it's a totally different cigar.
Now you gifted me, and I appreciated this guy. And it's a little guy, and I love the Robustos.
Yep.
I love the.
It's a 5x54.
And you said this is the best one we do.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I'm in love with it
from the jump. I mean, before we started, I lit it and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is." It said hello, introduced, gave me its business card, gave me a hug, sat me down. This is an amazing cigar, my friend. And what I love is the name, because it's a love letter, and I said it's a love letter to your dad, to your granddad, and you said it's a love letter to Alec too. And I think that's amazing. To me, that's a reason enough to support it.
Well, thank you. And if you look at it, you've got the original band, which have the 4 stars on it, which are the 4 generations. And then when Alec came into the fray, now we've got 5 stars above the name Patrimonio. That's the 5th generation. So everything, even the seals on the side of our Reserva, which we created when Alec was already part of the company and the team, has the U.S. seal. So our cigars start with the Spanish seal, where my great-grandfather was from, as I said. Then you got Cuba, where I was born and my dad was born. Then you got the Dominican Republic, the factory. Now we got the U.S. seal because Alec was born in the States. So everything we do has or harkens back to family and history and heritage. And one of the cool things that I always like to brag about, if you're out there and you have nothing else to do, and you, for example, Google Cuevas y Hermanos and Cigar Aficionado, you'll find articles on my dad and dating back to the 80s and 90s. So you can research us and see that we're not just making this stuff up, which I'm very proud of, having a story that's true. It's always very cool.
It's an amazing story. Now, all right, I learned a long time ago, if you want to be successful, you talk to successful people. That's why you're on the show, because you guys are an amazing company. What is your sort of mantra? What motivates you? Now, granted, you had an unbelievable, education because of your dad and your granddad, et cetera, 5 generations now. How do you tick? How do you tick in terms of businesses? You're very methodical. We've already said that. What is your process?
Well, I think like any other business, the first thing is we gauge our growth from year to year. And so far, it's been right on point. Yeah. And ultimately, what I would like to do, my dad's 83. He is phenomenally healthy, but he's 83. And it is what it is. I would really like to someday, and it may take another 5 years, right? Assuming we'll double up the time, let's make it even 6. And God willing, my dad is 89 and healthy. To become a name that people recognize as a brand that they go to. So that's ultimately the goal. It's not so much a number financially, it's the recognition amongst the names that I respect, the Fuentes of the world, the Padrones of the world, the Heroes of the world. I mean, there's a Oliva, there's a bunch of brands out there, Espinosa, et cetera, that you mention it and maybe even a casual smoker will know right off the bat. That would be really cool, and to have my dad kind of experience that. Although he's never really with us on the travels and the other, that's not his thing. But he knows, he's aware. That would be really, really cool. It'd be the best gift I think we can give him. You know, so that's what motivates me. It's ultimately to have his labor and what my grandfather and great-grandfather had started to become something that you can sit there and go, wow, we did this and we did it together.
Amazing. Alec, when I started smoking cigars, it was during the boom of the 90s.
Okay.
Where, as a young man in this business, where do you see the cigar business going?
Wow. So I've been asked this question on multiple different occasions in regards towards, just because, you know, obviously the younger market is not jumping more into cigars. In fact, women are now coming across the cigar market a lot more as well.
Shout out to the Sisters of the Leaf. That's right.
Definitely.
Big time.
So not just in the sense of flavored cigars, but more like Maduro, like even Corojo wrapper at that. So spicier sticks. And I think, truth be told, I don't think the cigar market is going to dwindle off in any way. And sure, the FDA might come about and there might be some changes here and there in regards towards their policies and regulations that they, you know, uphold. But the truth of the matter is there are a lot of younger individuals smoking cigars. In fact, a lot of my friends, even before the notion that I would smoke cigars, were smoking cigars as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they would come over. My dad can attest to this and just love their cigars. They'd smoke, oh, look what I brought home. You know, I got this from the shop and it's brand new on the market. It's hot. You know, check it out. So I think, truth be told, that there's going to be just a larger influx of younger individuals smoking cigars in particular. That's something that I would love to see. In fact, that also kind of goes towards my motivation in regards towards success. On top of the notion that it's also keeping the family heritage alive, which is something that I wish I was more involved with growing up. Not that I wasn't surrounded by cigars my whole life, but more so just had more of a piece in the say in terms of actually knowing what, you know, everything came from. It came from my great-great-grandfather way back in the day and so forth. So a lot of that information I ended up picking up when I was about 16, 17, and I somewhat regret that. I wish I kind of got more invested into that at a younger age. So keeping that heritage alive, and then on top of which, that just kind of leeways into, like I said, more younger individuals smoking cigars.
Yeah.
So hopefully they get to keep smoking ours if they stay on the shelves.
Well, for me, my first experience doing cigars, like I mentioned, was during the boom in the 90s. And I remember growing up in LA, I went to this place called George Hamilton, the actor.
Yeah.
Okay. He had a shop, and it was a complete turnoff for a young man like me because you had to wear a jacket. It was really huff, and I was like, what is this? And then right down the street was a guy named Philip Dane. And Philip Dane was the king of swap meets in Los Angeles. And he was maybe 25 years old, and you walked in there, and it was like rock and roll music. Pretty girls would say hello. They'd sit you down, and it really got me into cigars. Tell me, what is the youth in cigars? Where do you see the youth in cigars going? Because you've got to get that new customer.
I think cigars are in a good position because much like craft beer, you know, we had a Zoom meeting this morning with some gentlemen from Canada, and one of them, their daytime job is essentially to produce barley and whatnot for all these craft beer producers in Canada and California and whatnot. People like Alec, people his age, will show up, and there are multiple craft beers and they're willing to try different ones. With the youth now, I think they're less prone to getting married to one brand. And that really opens up a lot of doors. And you can kind of sense in the air that there's a surging boom in the industry again. It reminds me of the 90s, but more contained in the sense that the quality is still there. It's a great time to be a cigar smoker. Everybody's putting up their A game. You may not like cigar A, but it doesn't make it a bad cigar. It was engineered that way, right? So that flavor profile was meant for someone, not just throwing crap together. And the 90s was guilty of that a lot. There was a lot of junk out there.
Yeah.
There was a lot of crap, a lot of money to be made from a manufacturing standpoint. And maybe having brands, they also made it too. But certainly it wasn't the quality that you have now. And then today, the older generation, a lot of them will only smoke one particular brand. They'll come in and they'll smoke, let's say, a Padron 64. And they won't smoke a 26. They won't smoke anything else from Padron. They'll smoke a Padron 64. And in a particular size that they like. Whereas the younger folks are willing to get out of their comfort zone and smoke something different. And ultimately, in the end, this is still the kind of thing that, you never see anybody win a Super Bowl or anything of any notability and light up a Marlboro.
Yeah,
Nobody does that, right? Nobody celebrates. If you have a child, you're smoking a cigar. If you're getting married, you're smoking a cigar. You get a promotion, you're smoking a cigar. You graduate college, you're smoking a cigar, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes almost like a status thing and a celebratory thing. And it also helps when folks like Alec and his age group hit these milestones, but are willing to have a varied humidor. So maybe they're smoking a brand that's not part of their usual go-to because it is that special occasion. Whereas a lot of the older folks, they get set in their ways, and it's really tough to break through that barrier. And you can't fault them. I mean, you're smoking cigars that are phenomenal, and to tell them that sucks, you should try something else, that's a lie. So why would I ever say that?
Right.
But by the same token, they're saying, no, this is what I smoke. And Tico can attest to this. I mean, I'm sure he can attest to it, rather. There's people that walk in, I'm sure here, and only smoke that one thing. Buy that one box. These folks are a little more willing to get out of their comfort zone.
And how do you keep that momentum going? In other words, because obviously, Alec, you got to create quality product, because the minute somebody has a bad stick, they're like, okay, I'm never going to smoke that again.
Yeah.
How do you keep that going? In other words, how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep reinventing something that you guys have been doing for 100 years?
Well, I think there's two factors to take into consideration. One of them is more of on an educational standpoint, to which there are such things as faulty cigars. I mean, this is a man-made product, so there have been a few occasions, especially when I was working at the retail location, in which I'd pick up a cigar, let's say cigar X, as a matter of fact, right? So I'd be smoking it and it would be plugged, or I'd have to continuously be lighted because it just wouldn't stay lit. Excuse me. So I'd go through those motions, but I'd still pick up the cigar a second time around. And then the second cigar smokes phenomenally. It's something that I genuinely enjoy in terms of the blend, the tasting, and everything else. So I think a lot of it falls down towards the educational standpoint and understanding that not one cigar will make or break a brand, in my opinion, especially if it's coming from that one box. How about you pick up another one? Always give cigars at least 2 chances before you go on ahead and put it down immediately. And the other large factor in regards towards kind of changing things, it's more so, like my dad said, bringing things out in a methodical fashion. Not to overload immediately just with a bunch of brands and here's what we got. Because with the factory, you think that we do have the availability to just go on ahead and pump out a bunch of different blends, 1,000 different blends at a pop and things of that nature. But truth of the matter is, you can't really, that blend, once you release it, needs to stand on its own 2 feet. It has to be something that individuals can go to because of the flavor profile that they specifically enjoy for that cigar. Like my dad says, you don't want something that's extremely similar, albeit the same, towards a blend that you enjoy in comparison to one that's brand new. So a lot of that falls towards essentially coming things, rather releasing products at an equal pace, something that's efficient for us. That's how I see it.
Luis, tell me about the process of blending. I mean,
Okay.
it's got to be so painstaking, and it's got to be it's got to be right. Just tell me about how do you do it, and what's your style?
We always start with a Toro. That's our starting point. And then it's become easier now that we've had a variety of different blends, because you can pick up on something that you started with and just start off with changing the wrapper, right? And then seeing if that works. Usually that doesn't. But you have a starting point. And then you take away or add or detract depending on the tobacco, maybe like the Peruvian tobacco that we have here. We haven't used it before. So, but we have a base point, right? We have a baseline to start with. It's almost like starting to cook and you have your sofrito. If you're Hispanic, you know what I'm talking about, right? You got a base and then everything else kind of falls on top of that. So you start with the base. But it becomes a chore because you've got to smoke through a lot of different cigars. And people think that's really cool and fun. It becomes work. It really becomes work. Your palate is shot. You start sweating, you get nauseous. No matter how seasoned a smoker you are, it can really take a toll on you. And then once you finally think you've got it, usually what we'll do is, not every single time, we'll make a certain amount. We'll take them home. In my case, we'll let them sit there. And you try them a few weeks later. And it's sometimes a complete piece of crap. It just did not blend well at all. So your home run at the factory a few weeks earlier was not a home run later. So you got to go back to the drawing board. And then once you think you've got it all done, you're all in. You've only got a small sample size, right? It's myself, my son, my wife, my dad, a couple of my close friends. And then you're putting a bunch of money into packaging and distributing and all the other stuff, and you're hoping that the rest of the country's going to like it or that the world will like it. And so that's kind of a crapshoot, right? It's difficult.
So, on your point about so many cigars, so many tasting, when do you know? I mean, when does the light go off and say, aha?
I don't know. That's interesting. That's a great question. I think we kind of know. For example, when Patrimonio was born, and this is the most recent, so it's the easiest one to talk about, I knew we had a home run. I mean, I feel we have a home run. Not everyone may like it. I get that, and I can respect that. But I thought, wow, this is going to be just a phenomenal cigar. And you give it to people with this confidence because you think it's great. We both thought it was phenomenal. My dad, interestingly enough, his favorite is the Connecticut from the core line. He does not like fuller-bodied cigars. He doesn't like the bitterness. He's more of a Connecticut guy. And so my dad was uncomfortable in this particular blend because he didn't think it was balanced enough. We knew what we were looking for. And so at least what we do is we'll defer to one another. And ultimately, he really enjoys it. But I know at the factory, he's not picking that up. He's picking up that Connecticut. He's picking up that Connecticut in the Robusto size. That's what he likes.
Kind of what we were saying before. Old school.
Old school. That's his palate. So he'll come over to the house, or I go over to his house here in Miami, and or even in the DR. And of course, he has cigars. And if I offer him anything else that we have, even other blends from other people. Do you have a Connecticut? Yeah, that's his thing. So sometimes at this point, it's become, if Grandpa doesn't really like it and we like it, and we go that route. Because my dad is sort of missing the mark of what we're aiming for. But when you know, you know. And then you hope everybody else likes it. That's also the thing.
Last one before we go.
Sure.
For Alec, where is Cuevas in 20 years from now?
Cuevas 20 years from now.
You're sitting there at your house, your big house. You've probably launched a couple of more of these brands. Where do you want the company to be in 20 years?
I'd like to find our products throughout the States, more so than not, especially domestically. I think that's something that it would be a huge, and that's a long-term investment, right? Something that takes a lot of time to nurture, but that's a place that I'd like to see the company within 20 years. Now, I do know there's going to be a lot of drastic changes in regards to that. So my father will be running the factory, and I'll be, taking the mantle as the CEO of Casa Cuevas Cigars. So a lot of things are going to be changed in terms of the puzzle pieces, but regardless, I think they'll all sink in together. And like I said, that's the ultimate goal, is to be found anywhere domestically. It's nice to kind of be in this already 4 years into it and have individuals that have heard about our brand. I mean, whether it's through the break-in that happens, a couple of years back, or whether it's just because we make a really damn good smoke. Truth of the matter is, there's something that brings more of a smile to my face than seeing individuals that know about the product. So actually, I got a message out to somebody in Chile not too long ago, about a week ago, saying that they've heard of our product and that they wish we had it there in Chile, but that they are, doing their best to kind of see if we can enter that market and so forth. So it's very interesting to me to see the growth aspect of things only 4 years into it, and I can't even imagine what it would look like within 20 years. I'd say, like I said, the ultimate goal would be hopefully to be found throughout the States, somewhere where you can go to your local retail shop and find the product there.
Same question for you, Dad. Where's Cuevas in 20 years?
In 20 years, I think it piggybacks on what Alex said, and I think it piggybacks on what I had said earlier. I'd like it to be a successful company in the sense that it's well-known but respected. I think that would be really cool. I think we're going in the right direction. We're 4 years into it. We're in Switzerland, we're in the Congo, we're in Australia, we're in New Zealand. We're talking now with Canada. What country am I missing at this point?
UK.
Oh, we're in the UK. So, for essentially a very, very young company, we're doing pretty well. I'd like to see that growth continue, but a measured growth, something that we can control. I don't want to be a company that has a million facings, and God bless them, they're out there. And
Right.
I don't want to be that. I still want to be able to control the quality that we produce. Hopefully that'll happen.
I love it. Well, this is the new guy, Patrimonio.
Yep.
Love it. Pick it up. It's Luis and Alec Cuevas. 5 generations, 5 stars.